ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Power Vacuum. I'm your host, Belmont. And in what could be considered one of the all time bonehead plays, we have this article from PC Gamer. Dragon Age creator says EA execs thought BioWare fans would eat whatever slop they were given since the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. And the crazy part is, I can absolutely see an executive at EA saying this nonsense. Peter Mendelsohn, or Mandelson? Peter Mandelson, the oleaginous right hand of Tony Blair's Labor Party in the late 90s, once remarked to a colleague that the party had no need to focus on its traditional voter base and could safely dedicate itself to chasing more affluent, middle class conservative voters. After all, said Mandelson, its base had nowhere else to go. Don't worry, I promise we'll get to Dragon Age. 14 years of conservative party rule later, and you might think that kind of reasoning has been proven bankrupt, but only if you underestimate the powerful minds of the world's corporate executive class. It's not quite as consequential as the direction of British politics, but as it turns out, that EA had its own version of that thought process when it came to running BioWare in the 2010s. A notion that RPG fans would gobble up whatever you chucked their way so long as you could plausibly call it an RPG. Instead, they thought BioWare should focus on making games that appeal to people who don't usually play RPGs. Big mistake. Big, huge. So says David Gator, creator of the Dragon Age setting and BioWare veteran, in a recent chat with Games Radar. Per Gator, EA bosses used to refer to RPG stalwarts as living in the cave. That'd be the nerd cave, you see, where the nerds lived. You made an RPG, and the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. With EA bosses convinced that the nerd cave would spill out its denizens to any game with BioWare on the box, their philosophy became that you didn't have to try and appeal to them. You had to worry about the people who weren't in the cave, which was the audience we actually wanted, which was much larger. This is a gross misunderstanding of what it is. So they weren't coming out for RPGs. They were coming out because there was a point in time when BioWare didn't put its name on a bad game. Mass Effect 1 and 2, Knights of the Old Republic, Dragon Age. BioWare was white hot for years, and it was almost guaranteed that the game was going to be good when it came out. Hell, I liked Mass Effect 3. A lot of people complained about the ending, but I'm one of the people that views Mass Effect 3 as the ending. The whole game is the end of the series. And I understand their complaints, and I've said it before, and I'm not going to go over it again. You can check out other videos I've talked about. Maybe I'll do a full breakdown of Mass Effect series and the problem with the ending, but we're going to get back to this. EA just doesn't understand their own audience, is what it boils down to. Which is what it always boils down to with EA. Where was I? Uh, which is how you ended up with the decidedly more actiony and slick cinematic focus on games like Mass Effect 2 and 3 and Andromeda, as well as Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. And hey, probably Veilguard too. I don't know, I didn't play Veilguard. I absolutely love Dragon Age Inquisition though. I put a lot of time into that game. I thought the narrative and the character choices were fantastic. The gameplay, fantastic. It was slightly different. It felt like a combination of one and two. Like Inquisition felt like they had learned what people liked from one and what people didn't like from two, and they put in and they basically incorporated all of the good from both of those games into Dragon Age Inquisition. It had its own problems in some aspects in some places, but for the most part, I think it was just a solid entry to the series and second only to Dragon Age Origins. And depending on the time of day and how you catch me, I might say it was better than Dragon Age Origins. Very rarely will I say that, but there are times when There are aspects of Dragon Age Inquisition that I liked more than Origins, but Origins was just revolutionary. Where was I? Excuse me. Gone were the crunchy stats and behind the scene dice rolls from BioWare of yore. This was the era of spectacle. And to be fair, the execs for just a second, some of those games were bangers. BioWare did thread the needle on at least a few of them. But Gator wasn't thrilled at things, or wasn't thrilled as things were increasingly pushed in that direction, away from BioWare's roots. I was always trying to push it in our traditional mechanics, he said, and that wasn't very welcoming in the EA sphere. Gator left BioWare in 2016, first heading to Beamdog, a Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition fame, and then to his own studio at Summerfall, currently working on the unholy roguelite deck builder. On unholy, what the fuck is this? I don't normally click this stuff right away. Stray God Studios reveals its next game, an unholy roguelike deck builder. Musical RPG Stray Gods. Oh, following the success pre-launch. Da 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 da. I don't want to get into that. That's a long article. An unholy roguelike deck builder uh, sounds weird. Um, that meant he dodged the release of what might be the ultimate expression of EA's action-obsessed executive philosophy, Anthem, which was not a good game. Not even the Nerd Cave turned out for that one. Well, I didn't think Anthem was an RPG. I thought it was a shooter. Is that the end of the article? Well, that was abrupt. Um, well, okay. But let's address the issue with this statement. They'll turn up because it's an RPG. So I have here a page, the video game sales for the Final Fantasy franchise. Now we'll scroll up just a little bit and we're going to point out that the original Final Fantasy VII, right, where are we at? Sold 14.4 million units worldwide. All right. The remakes so far and the rebirth have sold a combined 10 million, 7 million, and then 3 million. So this is a good indicator right here. In modern times, the fall off that happens with RPGs when you don't put out stuff that people expect to be, you don't reach people's expectations. People don't just show up. Even for Final Fantasy VII, they don't just show up. 7 million with a drop down to 3 million. Okay, that's like a 60% loss, maybe a little more, upwards of 65% almost, a loss of player base. And that was, just a 4-year gap with that. Those were relatively close together. And if we scroll down here, you're going to see the real fall off where they made their big mistake, and that was with the Final Fantasy 13 series. And Final Fantasy 13, one, the big mistake was it was a return to form because Final Fantasy 12 was not a traditional JRPG. It was an open world explorative RPG. Although the Gambit system, when done right, is one of the best mechanics for your alternate characters in any RPG ever, and every Final Fantasy should have a Gambit system so you don't have to manually control characters, or every RPG that has where you have sole control of a character in combat and you have other party members should have a Gambit system or the Gambit like system. I don't care. It was near flawless and you could do anything with it. You could make the characters, it was basically programming AI. You get to program the AI of your side characters and your other party characters. Fantastic. Love the system. It's up there with the Nemesis system in my mind as far as mechanics that should always be in games. But Final Fantasy 13 was a return to the JRPG genre as a whole. The issue with Final Fantasy 13 is 50% of the game is fucking tutorial and it gets old quick. You get annoyed with it. I don't need this much tutorial. Just let me figure it out. But when the Final Fantasy 13 came out, it sold like crazy. 9.6 million units. When you go back and you look at 12, 8.3 million units for the core game of 12. That's a big jump. That's what you want in your games. You want a big jump. But then Final Fantasy 13 2 came out and we saw a big drop. 6 million units. A drop from 9.6 down to 6. It's pretty big fall off. But then there was Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy 13, the third installment of the trilogy, 3.58. So we'll just round that up to 3.6. 3.6 million units. Another big drop off. So you're looking at what, a 33% decrease and then a 45% decrease between the game series. And that was spanning 5 years, not even 4 years, right? 9, 11, 13, a 4 year span. And from the first game to the third, you lost 60% of your player base. So, no, you put out an RPG and the people in the cave will not just show up. History has shown you this, and not just old history with the Final Fantasy VII remake. That's recent history. That should have been your clue that, hey, we can't just pump out an RPG and anyone will show up for it, because they won't. You have to give them a reason to. You got to sell them on the game. People in the cave, if anything, are more picky than the people outside the cave. That's why they're in the cave, because of how picky they are. And that was your first mistake. All right. Your other mistakes are numerous and basically implausible to count, but EA just doesn't know how to win. That's their problem now. They have gone completely blind to regular gamer player base. They are so used to sports fans and EA Sports that those people will show up every year because that's what they play, that's what they want. They just want the new roster with the new players, and they get that with fulfillment every year from the game. You don't get that with mainline titles and RPGs or action games. New IPs, things like this, you need to give people a reason to show up. And EA, you haven't been giving us one. But that's all I have for this story in the continuing saga of EA's failures. This is your host, Belmont, signing out.